Hello,
Mm.
Mr. Trissler.
Drinking this early on a Friday should be illegal, but I'm so glad it's not. That means it's time for another round of homebrew history. Joey, how the hell are you?
You know, I'm better.
As if I didn't know already.
I'm better. I'm doing better. I like that you brought so much viv and verve and enthusiasm to that.
Hey, I'm excited.
It was like it was planned or something.
I know. I'm excited. Well, not as exciting as the evening you had yesterday.
Dude, that whole day, just... Do I have to? Must I?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So I went to a work meeting in Lake Providence, Louisiana, which to get to, you have to leave Louisiana, go into Mississippi, and then come out the other side. And it's like going through hell, and then bam, you're there. I had about a 2-hour meeting after my 4-hour drive. And then I started my 4-hour venture back home. And about an hour into it, the vehicle I was using overheated and then melted through some of the electric coils and wiring and such. Left me stuck on the side of a road in a thunderstorm with a cornfield to one side and a cotton field to the other. And I'm going to tell you what, one of the most exciting experiences of my life thus far.
That.
Taking in a thunderstorm in a cornfield with no shelter. That was pretty cool. That'll put hair on your chest. If you're not already got the gumption, that'll do it.
If it were me, the hair would be standing up on my back.
So then,
felt like you were in Twister, huh?
I thought I was Bill Paxton or David Cornsweat, one of the two.
Either one.
I'm going with Cornsweat because Superman, but Bill Paxton also works. Nevertheless, did that, and then I finally got in touch with some people at the main office that were able to get me a rental car. Problem, I was like 40 miles away from where the rental car was.
Yeah.
No way of getting there until a Tensaw Parish Sheriff's deputy stopped and was like, "I'm going to help you out."
Thank you.
So he brought me from parish line to parish line, and then the next parish over, their deputy took me all the way to Natchez. Then from Natchez, a police officer there got me to Enterprise, only with like a minute to spare before they closed. Got a rental car and made my way back to Baton Rouge, and then finally back to Ponchatoula. And after a whole day of doing that, I realized, I was like, oh God, we were supposed to record a podcast tonight. And I don't considering I couldn't remember like how to get home and I couldn't think about what I wanted to eat for dinner, I don't know that I would have been really worth a single solitary damn last night. But here we are.
Now they're here to rectify that.
Yeah. And I, like we get excited about these, and it's kind of fun to bring on someone that, yes, we're friends with, but we've both studied under, we both learned from, and someone who continues to make such a positive impact on students and on future leaders of our nation's military. Yeah. So why don't we just, let's just cut out all the fawning and the flattery and bring on to the show Dr. Sam Cavell.
Hey, lads. How's it going?
Good.
Yeah, well,
I know you had a rough day, Joey. I gotcha. It happens.
So, how are you? I'm fantastic, comparatively.
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad to hear. I'm glad you calmed down.
Not to add to any flattery or anything, but my youngest brother Brady, he has not met very many people from Australia. So by default, but also by your accolades, you are his favorite Aussie.
Oh, that's so sweet.
he's come out to, which, I might be throwing myself under the lawnmower here, but and the blades are down. But I remember he came to Red, White, and Brew with us one semester, and he's like, he goes, where is Sam from? And he's like, I can't quite pinpoint her accent. I said, but she's an Aussie, and he's like, I love her.
Well, the accent is very messed up. I've been here. It is. I've been here for over 30 years. Went to school in England. So I say y'all and crikey, all this.
And we love you more for it.
You run the gamut of Cajun, Australian, Exeter.
That's right.
Ram that all together. So, this is the double header, because this will be part of a little 2-part series that's going out, 2 little mini-sodes that go out about Midway.
Mm-hmm.
And we've already talked with Craig Simons about the battle, right? And, if you're not going to have Admiral Nimitz, Craig Simons is a pretty good, second place, a good pinch hitter. I don't know anybody else that can really get inside of Nimitz's head quite like he's been able to. And, those,
True.
I don't know about you, but I thought I learned more in the hour and 20 minutes that we were with him on Midway than I did from reading any of the what we'll call later the misguided classics.
He's
about teaching Midway, right?
He's amazing. I mean, Craig's books they have always been incredible, and his latest offerings are no different. They are just wonderful volumes. I mean, his Midway volume is fantastic. Mm-hmm. His Nimitz, I was trying to buy the Nimitz book almost a year before it came out, and I think the people at the World War II Museum were just sick of seeing me come into the bookstore going, "Have you got it yet? Have you got it yet?" And they're like, "No, we'll call you." But no,
please stop coming in. Please stop stalking us. Don't call us; we'll call you.
Exactly. Please go away. No, it's a great book, and so is his Midway book. I mean, for narrative history, you cannot do better. It is this succinct volume that tells you everything you need to know with all the latest scholarship in it. So yeah, definitely a new classic for sure.
And tonight we're so used to doing this at night. And now we're going to talk about teaching Midway, because you come to us with a really unique perspective in that you teach both undergraduates, graduates, who are primarily civilians, mm-hmm. and you also teach to the Naval War College with prospective, military officers who are trying to enhance their understandings of leadership. And here you are with this opportunity to talk about Midway. So how do you make that applicable?
Yeah, well, before I start, because you mentioned that, I have to say that the views I'm about to discuss are my own. They do not come from the DoD or the Navy or anyone else, the Naval War College. I'm an adjunct, okay? So I have to say those disclaimers. However, yeah, I mean, it's pitching that story to 3 different audiences. And so I don't write about Midway. I mean, I'm a naval historian, but I focus on the age of fight and sail. That's where my research leads me. But I have to teach Midway a lot, teach World War II history a lot. So trying to pitch that for the undergrad, the graduate, and then the PME student, the professional military education student, those are 3 different things. And generally it will break down along the lines of undergraduates. You're going to usually have a tactical discussion, right? Mm-hmm. The action, the tactics, the choices that happen in the moment. Graduate, it's going to be tactical, maybe operational. Depending on the class, we might touch on strategy. But then when you're looking at your PME students, then it's much more of a strategic discussion, because what you want to do is get to the guts of why these decisions were made. What are the foundations, the strategic theoretical foundations that the navies on both sides were building on? Why did these choices happen the way they did? And it's all part of that lessons learned, that guidance that is going to hopefully instruct them as they move forward in their professional careers in the military. So yeah, but I mean, I think one thing you can do for all of them to kind of start the discussion is think about the myth busting, right? Because this is one of those stories, the story of Midway, that is riddled with the mythology. Mm-hmm. In fact, the mythology dominated for such a long time. And it's only these recent books that have come out, since Partial and Tully and Dallas Isom more recently, and Craig's book on Midway. This has started to rewrite the story, but those old classics they set the tone for decades. That was and there they are, right? Incredible Victory and Miracle at Midway. Those titles tell you everything you need to know about the content of those stories, don't they? That this was a victory we should not have had. That this was, we were way outnumbered. We should not have won. It was a skin of our teeth kind of victory that we pulled out of nothing. That luck is really the dominant factor here, and that's just not the truth at all. And I think these new stories have definitely debunked that and started to show us something different.
That title Miracle at Midway is almost offensive to Nimitz. It's almost a spit in his face, and because as we talked about with, Dr. Craig Simons, is that, there was no miracle. This was all based on, strategy. This was based on code breaking, so this is a very, I don't know, it's one of those things that it's kind of like a lost causery, if you will, to sort of, sort of add myth to a story that really, frankly, doesn't need it.
Yeah. And in a way, you cannot blame. I mean, these are amazing books. They're great narratives, right? In a way, you can't blame the authors here, because Gordon Prang in particular was working with one Japanese source when he wrote this, right? Mitsuo Kushida, who was an air group commander. He was there. And at the end of the war, he finds Christianity. He comes to the United States, and he becomes the voice of the Japanese side of things. And that's all we had. The access to Japanese sources, Japanese language sources, bilingual historians. That's a new thing. And so he's working with what he's got, in a way, and it's just that what Partial and Tully really uncovered in Shattered Sword was that he lied, right? I mean, he's not exactly telling the full truth. It's a few porky pies thrown in there. So and that's where you start to break down a lot of that mythology. Yeah.
So are these books, these authors, did they walk so Partial and Tully and Craig Simons could run?
Yeah, I think that's a natural and a good analogy to make, because anyone who gets into the Midway story, or anyone of a certain age, I want to age myself here, but anyone of a certain age, your access, your entree into the story of Midway was these books.
Yep.
So, from there, it starts the interest that is then going to lead to the additional research that's going to get you to where we are now. And by all means, we're not at the end of that. Getting to Japanese sources is no easy thing. Even if you can pass the language barrier, the language of a lot of these documents is not standard Japanese. It's this special dialect, in a way, that you have to be able to read this operational dialect, this very formal kind of writing. So there's still a lot to be uncovered there. And I think Tony Tully is still working on that kind of detailed, operational sort of picking down to the bare threads, trying to get to what was happening, because we still don't really know what was happening on the flight decks or the hangar decks of the Japanese vessels. Not really. Not in terms of minute by minute, blow by blow.
I think sometimes too, and Bo, we've talked about this, and Sam, you and I have gone back and forth over this even when I was in school. It's like, it's easy for us sometimes to pick apart the early sources, right? It's like me sitting here talking about the Battle of Franklin going, well, gosh, James Lee McDonough and Thomas Conley, they just wrote this awful freaking book. It's so terribly sourced. It's like, well, when they wrote it in 1980, they didn't have access to newspapers.com, and they couldn't sit in the comfort of their home and do a lot of the archival research that I'm doing. And so then you criticize that, and then you criticize the later books, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, this book is great because it was written in 2013 and that, has more access. And, oh, whatever you write is good because I have more access. So in a way, it's like it's fun to poke at them, but also it's like, well, we wouldn't have half of the information that we do have
Right.
without these.
Right. You know, absolutely. And the internet's changed everything, right? I mean, it's changed it in my lifetime since I've been in this career. You know, the access to documentary sources and manuscript sources is just light years ahead of what it was when I started writing books and articles, you know? So, yeah, no disparagement to the work that was done here, because they were amazing narratives.
Yeah.
And that, boy, you talk about hooking students, this will do it, right? Because it's readable, it's a page turner, it's like reading a novel. And it's just some of these important details were not available. And those important details are now available. So they complicate the narrative, that's for sure. I mean, the story of Midway is not an easy story to tell, okay? It's a lot of complicated moving parts. And so that's where kind of just drawing out what's important, and being able to get that across to those different levels of students that you have to work with, that's always the challenge here. And that's, I guess, what I thought was interesting about the discussion we're going to have today is, like, you know, how do you get to the nitty gritty, the important stuff? And how do you emphasize that? And what sources are you going to use to go find that information? You know, like these. Yeah, these are the critical resources, I would say. I would start here, and then you can dig into more information about the Japanese Navy itself in books like Kai Gun, which is quite old too now. It's like 97 or something. You can dig into books on Japanese wartime culture, Bushido ideology, that sort of thing. From Sally Payne is definitely the go-to on that one. There's also a wonderful book out by a Japanese author called Asada, called From Mahan to Pearl Harbor. So that kind of dives into more of that strategic, theoretical question, as well as to why the Japanese are making the choices that they're making going into this battle. So there's just this, you can broaden the discussion through a whole lot of additional literature that really does enrich the story, but certainly does make it more complicated. It's not a neat pigeonhole of a narrative to tell.
Now, I'm steering this with no idea of what slide comes next, so you have to tell me when you want to.
Gosh, I have to remember myself. Okay, so the next, it's just a map. So I guess that's a good place to go to next. It's just a map of the battle, because I think that also speaks to the complexity, right? My goodness, look at any Japanese plan that's happening with the Navy at this time is going to be complicated. Okay, and here's a map in which you see, or you know, the whole operation for Midway that's going off, and all the moving parts that are associated with that. Right. There's the Kido Butai, there's the troop landing forces, there's the battle fleet force with Yamamoto, there's the submarine screen, which was supposed to be in place before our carriers left Pearl Harbor, which made it there after they'd already left, so wasn't able to do anything. And it also shows the entire separate operation that was headed up to the Aleutians. Okay, at the same time, and not as a diversion, mind you. That's another thing that's, you know, in those early books, is that, oh, this Aleutian campaign was entirely a diversion for Midway, which it was not. It was its own separate functional campaign designed to put Japanese boots on American soil in Alaska, you know, and really tap into those fears about a Japanese invasion. So, you know, they are trying to work multiple angles at the same time, which also helped with this really complex situation. And of course, it was a problem because, you know, one of the strategic things we talk about in the PME classes is that the Japanese were very influenced by Alfred Thayer Mahan, the influence of sea power upon history, and the principles that Mahan espoused. You know, and this is a very simplistic way of thinking of it, but you always think of, the battle fleet is the key, right? You want to have a big, strong battle fleet to be able to bring about a decisive battle against another battle fleet, and the strongest will win, kind of thing. And then you want concentration of force. You want to put all those assets together to be able to have the biggest impact against your enemy. Well, the fact is, the Japanese might have been very Mahanian, but they cherry-picked what they wanted to take from Mahan, right? They picked this and they left that on the table. And what they left on the table here is concentration of force. And ultimately, I think that's a big part of the story, because Nagumo often gets really slammed, as being incompetent, as being not aggressive enough, as being someone who just should have never been in this position. And I think he is kind of the tragic hero of this story in many ways, because he's hamstrung by the limitations of the force that he has in many ways. He never has enough aircraft to be able to do the two jobs that he's assigned to do, one of which is to subdue Midway, the island itself. The other is to take out the American carriers. He doesn't have enough aircraft to do that on the 4 aircraft carriers that he's got. Now, if he'd have concentrated that force and maybe brought in the 2 light carriers that went up to the Aleutians, that could have been a very different story at Midway. Right?
That's one of it's interesting that you bring up Mahan and Mahanian theory, because it's one of the things that we talked about with Dr. Simons, was Ian Toll's book, how he spends an entire 3 chapters just going into Mahan's impact on the United States' naval understanding, Great Britain's naval understanding, and Japan's naval understanding. And one of the big things is, like you mentioned, they cherry pick things, but they also look at their own history, right? They look at naval performance during the Russo-Japanese War. They look at the actions of, aside from Yamamoto, the greatest naval figure in their history, in Admiral Toga, and they completely ignore all of the lessons from both Toga and Mahan. And then we're left sitting here, 80 plus years later, going, well, I wonder, why they did that. Why? What's your thought?
Yeah, it's and this is another sort of myth too that can be busted at various levels of how you pitch this story, is thinking about the Japanese naval juggernaut or military juggernaut as being this monolith, right? Which it was not in any way, shape, or form. First of all, the Army and the Navy couldn't agree on anything. They're constantly at each other's throats. It's almost like a civil war within Japanese leadership. And then within the Navy itself, you have a civil war going on. You have different factions that have very different understanding of how to prosecute a conflict, of what their assets should be doing in a conflict, of where the focus should be. I mean, the easiest way to kind of identify this factionalism is through what they used to call the fleet faction, and the treaty faction. The treaty faction, of which Yamamoto was sort of at the lead, was very much about trying to stick with the limitations that were imposed by the Washington Naval Treaty, which essentially meant that Japan's Navy would be limited to its own sphere of influence, right? It wasn't going to be able to project power across the Pacific the way it does in this conflict. And in that way, it sort of stops Japan from getting involved in any big worldwide, catastrophic wars like this. But the fleet faction is like, no, the limitations imposed on us are unjust, they are unlawful, and we need to build as many capital ships as we possibly can, and we're going to go out there and we're going to be aggressive. I mean, Yamamoto did not want war with the United States. So how does a man who doesn't want war with the United States, because he knows the United States, he's been here, he's seen our capacity to produce, right, our industrial capacity. So how does a man who believes this, who is very strongly in the treaty faction, end up being the architect of Pearl Harbor, right? It's a conundrum, because the answer is he essentially loses the fight. the Japanese say, no, we are going to go to war with the United States. There is no avoiding war with the United States. This is going to happen. And then Yamamoto says, okay, if it's inevitable, then the only way to do this is to knock them out on, the first blow kind of thing. We have to make a knockout punch. We have to take out all of their naval assets at Pearl Harbor. And that's the only way I'm moving forward. Otherwise, I resign, and I might even commit suicide. It's like, and they're like, no, don't do that. I mean, it's extraordinary how much, even though he's on the wrong side and he's on the losing side of the argument about we're going to war, he had enough power and enough charisma and enough clout within the Navy to be able to put that kind of ultimatum on them. So, and that's how we end up where we end up, where he believed had 6 months, right? 6 months to run wild. Yeah. And that's exactly what he had.
Well, that's what we said with Simons too, was only one naval commander in this picture between the two, Nimitz and Yamamoto, went to their naval boards and said, well, if you don't agree with me, I'll just resign. The other one didn't do that at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Well, Sam, let me ask you this question. So kind of comparing, undergrad, graduate, and, PME students, what is sort of the first thing that you introduce to undergrad students versus graduate students versus PME students?
Okay. I think the first thing to kind of get a handle on is that, okay, if it's not a miracle, then what were we working with? Why were we so well prepared? And the answer is our intel, right? Our code breaking, Joe Rochefort and his team. And then leadership, naval leadership, starting with Nimitz. Okay. Nimitz is the guy who has to take the big risks here. And why does he feel like he can take the risks? Well, number one, he's got a direct line on the code breaking, intel, mainly through Eddie Layton and Layton's connection to, who's on Nimitz's staff, and Layton's connection to Joe Rochefort, who's there at FRUPAC in Pearl Harbor. Now, technically, Nimitz wasn't supposed to get that information directly. FRUPAC and Rochefort were supposed to answer to Op 20G in Washington, D.C., and then the Redmond brothers Admiral Redmond would decide who was going to get that information and how and when, and specifically what was going to Nimitz. Well, Nimitz could bypass all of that because of Rochefort and Layton's friendship, and they're right there in Pearl Harbor. So he's got this immediacy in terms of information that, might not have existed otherwise. Then he's making some pretty hardcore mathematical calculus situations in terms of what he knows from Coral Sea that's just happened, right? He knows that he can probably take out a carrier with 3 dive bomb hits, right? 3 bombs on a carrier probably is going to take it out. And he's basing this on the calculus that, okay, well, it's going to probably take 6 aircraft striking to be able to make this happen. So if he's got 18 dive bombers, he can probably put those bombs on target, right? In terms of the ratios that he's working with. So if you've got 2 dive bomber squadrons on board each aircraft carrier, you should be able to take out 2 aircraft carriers, theoretically. So he's doing this kind of mathematics, which is hopefully getting him to where he needs to be. And then he's got to just take the big risk and say, yes, if we can get the drop on them, if we can ambush the ambushers, then we can make this happen. And that's another big thing to kind of make even my undergraduates aware. Midway wasn't an objective for the Japanese. They didn't really care about Midway as, a place to take, invade, and hold. It was the bait, because the objective was to take out the remaining carriers. And I think it's also important to understand how we get there, because the whole Midway operation that Yamamoto envisions after Pearl Harbor was not going to go ahead. Okay, there is the high command, the headquarters were not going to let the Midway operation happen. They were like, nope, it's too risky, not going to do it. And then the Doolittle raid comes in and bombs the living daylights out of Tokyo. okay, and other places. And it's so embarrassing to Imperial HQ that they're like, okay, you can do it. Out you go and do your worst. Take out those carriers, because it was the carriers that enabled this attack. So he gets to go and do this. And the whole idea is you go and you take this valuable asset and you force the Americans to come out and fight you. The Japanese don't believe we will come out willingly to a fight. And I think this is the other key part of it too, not understanding the mindset of your enemy. And the Japanese did not. I mean, they thought that attacking Pearl Harbor was going to force us out of the war, that we'd be like, oh, no, now we've lost all our naval assets. Well, how about we just do a deal? How about that?
Mm-hmm.
And thinking in that way is just absurd. There is no way a strike on Pearl is going to get us to the negotiating table. They're still thinking in a limited war pattern, when that's not what this is. It's not how we saw it anyway.
And the Americans highly underestimated the ability of the Japanese, which allowed Pearl Harbor to sort of happen. Yeah. And it's kind of refreshing, a little bit to learn that we learned from that mistake. But the Japanese make the same mistake, less than a year later.
Yeah.
And Nimitz is sort of the one to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's the other key point. That's a real takeaway in all of these stories, is the fact that the U.S. Navy in particular learns from its mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, there's another great book that's out there, Trent Hone's Learning War.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing book, which is, it basically shows us the process of how we learn from our mistakes. And I think, I wish we still kind of understood this aspect of the story in our present day military circumstances, because you were allowed to make mistakes and you were allowed to still have a job in World War II. And Nimitz is the perfect example of this. I'm not sure if Craig talked about this. I'm sure he did, but that, one of Nimitz's first experiences in command, he runs his ship aground, right? You do that today, you will never go to sea again, right? And he had this sort of relationship with subordinates as well, who did things wrong, and he basically would say to them, do you know what you did wrong? And they would say, yes, sir, I know what I did wrong. And he's like, okay, don't do it again. And you learn from your mistakes. The Navy in World War II was really good at that. And we learn from our mistakes at Coral Sea, and we put them into practice at Midway, right? We're not perfect, not by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, there are real mistakes, especially in the specifics of, how we launched our aircraft. The way that Yorktown launched her aircraft in her first strike. She's doing a deck load strike, right? You put all your aircraft up on the flight deck and off you go. The other two aircraft carriers under Spruance did not do that, right? Hornet and Enterprise are trying to put everything up, and it takes forever to get everyone airborne, which means that pieces of those flight groups are going off in different directions at different times, and which is why we have the disasters with the VT8 and VT6. They get shot down because they don't have any coverage. They don't have any support. So Spruance didn't have that experience that Fletcher did, because he was there at Coral Sea, right? So he knows more. And even within the battle, it's interesting, because Fletcher he knows what he's doing, but Spruance is learning. So by the afternoon strikes, when they're going after Hiryu, Spruance is launching more of a deck load strike kind of situation, so that he can control how these air groups go out together, and it's much more effective. So yeah, we learn from our mistakes, but the Japanese are not great at doing that. And and this is one of the arguments in several of the books, is that there was too much doctrinal control, that they were too narrowly prescribed in terms of their tactical options, because of how Japanese doctrine worked. And there's arguments about that. Dallas Isom says, no, not so much. Partial and Tully say, yeah, doctrine was really important. So, yeah, the bottom line is they don't learn as well from their mistakes as the U.S. Navy does.
Mm-hmm. And that's pretty well seen throughout. And I think having just read now 90% of the Tull books, because I'm in volume 3 now, which is no easy chore to get done in a summer, but here we are.
They're big books.
They are. And the third one, I thought, oh, okay, well, the third volume, that'd be kind of small. And in his introduction, he goes, it's the longest of the 3 because I figured I'd just put everything that I couldn't put in the other 2 in here. Thanks. But you can see the gradual improvement in the learning process by which the Navy comes from 1939 to 1944-45. And it's the little things like when and how to launch aircraft and how the recovery should work, and should you have fully laden and armed bombs in the same storage area as your aircraft? Should these things be separated and in magazines? Should you drain the fuel lines out of your lines when you're in the refueling process and when you're at sea? How should that process work? What should you do with damage control? All these little things that the Navy might not have had perfectly figured out in 1941. Even by 1942, 6 months after Pearl Harbor, they've already started to learn a lot of these lessons. And by the time you get to 1944-45, it's impossible. And I say this as someone who I have, the Royal Navy flag is just right outside my doorway here, right? I think it's the finest naval force in the world. It can't compare with what the United States is doing by 1944-45 because the skill and the learning process. And, we say this with, we've got Ray Spruance right here on the slides, but even with the mistakes that Spruance makes, and notably the mistakes that Bill Halsey makes in 1944-45, even those you can excuse for all of the great progress that was made through the 4 years of the war.
Definitely. And I think you bring up a really good point. Okay, the damage control, oh my God, that was a game changer, right? And how did we get that level of damage control? Well, Fletcher was in command and he watched Lexington burn to the waterline at Coral Sea. Right. So the damage control guys on board Yorktown are like, whoa, what can we do? By the way, I think this is really cool. I think the guy who comes up with this idea, his name is Oscar Mayer. It says, hey, what if during battle we drain the fuel lines and pump in an inert gas, CO2? Let's see if that, prevents this kind of disaster. So they implement it. And this is the other thing. You have to have high command that is willing to go, okay, let's try it and see what happens. And they do. And this is what allows Yorktown in the Midway fight to be absolutely slammed by the strike that comes in from Hiryu and survive to the point. So she's suffering about, I think the number is something like a 71% damage rate from that first strike. Okay, so she's already been held together by spit and duct tape. Then she gets hit. She gets really slammed. 71% damage. The damage control crews are so proficient. They manage to put out the fires. They manage to get things under control on Yorktown so that the next strike that comes in from Hiryu actually thinks that that's not Yorktown. They think that, oh, well, this must be the other 2 carriers that we need to take out. And they strike Yorktown a second time. So they'd gotten so much under control. They'd gotten the ship looking relatively normal again. And that means she gets struck twice. And that sort of becomes, unsustainable. But it means that we still have 2 carriers alive at the end of that battle, which was not the intention. The whole point that Hiryu was there trying to do was to even the odds, to take it down to 1 carrier and 1 carrier, and they couldn't do that because of the damage control efforts that were done on Yorktown, which is just amazing, right? And I think that in a way, like Spruance really gets credit for the victory at Midway, and rightly so. He's an amazing commander. He's calm, cool. He is just stone cold Steve Austin. He really is through this whole thing. But Fletcher is the unsung hero here. I think he's just an incredible commander. He is overall in command, and yet when Yorktown is taken out of the fight, he has just the magnanimity, I think is the best word, to say, no, I'm not going to transfer over and take over from Spruance. Spruance has got this. He's a professional. He knows what he's doing. He's doing a great job. I am not going to go over to Enterprise and say, oh, thank you very much, Admiral Spruance. You can leave the bridge now. I'll take over from here. He didn't do that, right? I mean, he's humble enough to sort of say, okay, I can step away now because this guy knows his job and I trust him. That sort of professional courtesy and credit, that's pretty amazing.
I think it's definitely an unsung part of it, that you have your subordinates that you can actually trust.
Yeah.
And that makes a world of difference, because if you can't trust your subordinates, especially commanding officers, of other aircraft carriers, what are you doing, So Sam, kind of, because we talked a lot about with Craig Simons, sort of about the nitty gritty of the battle, but obviously you do have this slide here that kind of explains, the force in numbers, for Midway here. So I guess if you could, I see in parentheses, because I wanted to kind of talk to you about that, because this obviously Midway is sort of the emergence of the aircraft carrier, and kind of stepping away from the, First World War era, dreadnought era battleships. But I see that you have in parentheses that the Japanese have 2 battleships and 2 heavy cruisers. Useless. I guess explain that if you could, because I don't know.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have to credit John Parshall for these slides because I stole them completely from him for my classes because they're so effective. But yeah, I mean, the age of the aircraft carrier completely supplants the efficacy of battleships, right? I mean, when you can project power at a distance, and the Japanese aircraft had almost double the range of our aircraft, so they can be striking us when we cannot strike them. I mean, that is a absolutely enormous advantage to bring to the table. And so in the midst of that kind of a discussion, a tactical discussion, what's a battleship going to do? The range of its guns is not going to be anywhere near the range of an aircraft that can fly out and attack an enemy ship, and sink it. So, yeah, the whole point of these heavy cruisers, I mean, they really couldn't contribute much to a carrier battle. And I think Yamamoto understands that. Yamamoto is a carrier guy. Nimitz understands the powers of carriers, but on both sides, behind those men, you have whole sections of the navies, Japanese and US, who are like, no, the battleship is still what it's all about. That battleship as the capital ship is something that dies hard, right?
I mean, when you spend 20 and 30 years pumping millions of dollars into construction and training and all that other stuff and outfitting them, and then all of a sudden you get the Japanese Navy going, actually cut everything off the deck and just put a flat top on it, please.
Yeah, the 2 biggest ships here are conversions, right? So it's the absolute necessity of turning this into, making carriers the capital ships of the new forces. I mean, you live or die by that, right? And this slide is really all about, debunking that myth that we were completely outnumbered. Okay, because what it shows is that, okay, we might have been 4 carriers to 3 at the actual where the rubber met the road in the battle, but we had Midway, which isn't like an unsinkable carrier. And with all of those Midway aircraft, we outnumbered the Japanese aircraft almost by 100. right?
Mm-hmm.
So so it wasn't where we're talking about, like, overall, yes, the Japanese had enormous naval superiority to us in the Pacific theater because we're a two ocean power, so we've got divided assets, right? But where we're talking about the action happening in this battle, we actually had an advantage.
Mm-hmm.
As much as B-26s and B-17s from Midway were an advantage, which turns out they weren't. But hey, we had them there, But those Avengers, and they did their job. They did their job of creating that distraction, creating that time frame in which Nagumo couldn't launch. She couldn't launch when he was being attacked.
Mm-hmm.
So, all of this and all of the attacks, even our poor old devastating performances from our devastators, those sacrifices of VT8 and VT6, right? What that's all about is preventing Nagumo from launching his own strikes against our carriers, taking that time off the clock so that he couldn't attack us when he had best advantage to do so. Yeah.
I think too, and kind of going back to something that we talked about, and this is at the risk of us getting massively off topic, and I fully embrace that, but that's what this show is halfway about. We talked about lessons learned, and we also just mentioned how the Japanese Navy, rather than find a solution for their battleships and their big guns, they just simply cut the tops of them off and turn them into aircraft carriers. It seems like the U.S. Navy found a way to adapt the role of the battleship in supporting their land-based operations. So when you have an amphibious operation, you put all the battleships, all the guns you can bring to bear, and bombard the islands that you're about to assault. You use that essentially as this umbrella. And you use the aircraft carriers to throw out later in the war the big blue blanket over the islands to support their operations. The Japanese seem like they never quite grasped the idea of using their naval vessels that aren't carriers to support their operations in these islands, these far-flung outposts. And then you end up with super battleships like the Yamato sitting at anchorage basically the entire war. Comes out, fires arguably the longest naval gunshot successful hit in the war, and then dies in a blaze of glory kamikaze attack in Okinawa. And it makes no sense. It makes no sense.
Doesn't. It does not. It doesn't make any sense. And
it's
an interesting question, really, because and some of that may come down to just the whole idea of supporting land-based forces is not something that the Navy wants to do, right? Because the Navy and the Army don't want to necessarily help each other in that way. But I think it's also, particularly towards the latter part of the war, at least after 42 anyway, is that they just simply don't have that many assets left.
Yeah,
and they can't produce them.
The supply. I mean, how do you fuel them? How do you keep all the battleships plus all your carriers? You kind of have to do the force allocations. What do you do with that?
Yeah, and that's of course why Yamato gets run aground, right? Because there's not enough fuel for a return voyage. So, and all of that comes from, I think the Emperor turned to the head of the Navy and said, well, what has our Navy been doing? By the time we get into late 44, 45, and they're like, wow, this is embarrassing. Maybe we ought to just use it like a giant human torpedo. I mean, the plan was to run her aground on Okinawa, and then everyone would jump off and become part of the land force. Well, that was never going to happen, right? Yeah. I mean, they were never going to get that close. So, and in a way, this sort of speaks to that issue of Japanese naval doctrine. Okay, we see this in Midway because one of the things that happens in the later part of the battle, where Hiryu is the sole remaining carrier that isn't burning, in catastrophic fire, what they should have done is pull her back, right? Pull her back because she had the range to be able to launch her aircraft and strike at the American forces from quite a distance. But instead of doing that, Nagumo decides that he wants to make a surface attack. So he's going to bring up the battleships, bring up the cruisers, and Hiryu is going to go in for a surface attack. So they start steaming towards the American carriers. Well, that's just a really poor use of a Japanese carrier with very long-range capabilities with the air groups that it has left, which wasn't a lot, but it still had that capacity. So there's a poor choice of use of assets here that I think does speak to this idea that, no, we must all go in. We never give up on the attack. You must do your best. You must throw everything you have at it, rather than being more pragmatic in the moment and going, look, this is the most important capital asset we have. Let's pull it back. Let's let it live to fight another day. It can still send in its air groups and do what damage they can while the surface force engages. But that's not what they do. They waste a carrier. I mean, it's really, really flawed tactical thinking, strategic thinking, all of it. All of it comes to play there. And I think that plays on a lot of these other stories too, even going later on into the war. Don't worry, we have our own problems on that level with, what is the purpose of this particular weapon system with submarines, right?
Right.
Because for the first couple of years of the war, we're not quite sure what the submarines are supposed to do. Are they fleet support, or are they commerce raiders? And we try to do both, not very successfully. And then we have lousy weapons on board. So when the torpedoes don't work, but there is a fundamental problem in terms of how do we use these assets? And I think the Japanese just had more of a problem with that than we did. And we could adapt more quickly when we saw that there was an issue.
So this is kind of a two-parter here. Something that Joey and I talk about on the show a lot is the decisive battle, the turning point, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't too long ago that we talked about Gettysburg, and whether or not it's a turning point, whatever. And people have
my feelings on this. There's no such thing as a turning point.
All too well. This one, I think, has the only exception that we've kind of come to so far. Maybe Trafalgar, perhaps, but that's another story and a different drink for me. But when it comes to Midway, obviously the Imperial Japanese Navy, their losses are substantial. And this is something that they cannot replace.
Right.
When you present this to your students, do you present Midway as a turning point? And not only that, but is this also the emergence of the United States Navy as a modern force?
Good questions. Great questions. To my undergrads, yes, I do. As a turning point, yes. As a decisive battle, no. And my argument there is that a decisive battle is one that ends the war.
Right.
Okay. That's really what it means. And this is not that. Just like Trafalgar is not a decisive battle in that it does not end the war, the Napoleonic Wars. What they do is they shift the balance of power. Okay. And the turning point aspect of this is that before Midway, the Japanese are on the advance. They're on the attack. After Midway, they're retreating. Okay. So it turns the movement of the war. And in that way, it is a turning point. Okay. Now, once we get to sort of my graduate level courses and my PME courses, we break that down even a little bit too, But yes, you're absolutely right. The loss of those 4 carriers at Midway is irreplaceable. They cannot come back from this. And I think that really is, at least in the war in the Pacific, a key part of the whole story of how things start to shift and change. And then you have to acknowledge that it's not just Midway, right? Because it's Midway plus Guadalcanal. Because you're not going to have a turning point in the Pacific theater based solely on a naval victory, okay, and solely on the destruction of these naval assets. You have to start to attrit the military forces. And where do we do that? we create the meat grinder on Guadalcanal, right? And unfortunately, it's a meat grinder for our guys too, but they are in more of a situation where they cannot replace their losses. And we start to bring our naval assets to bear. We're pretty thin on the ground after Midway, but 43, the production starts to kick in, and we bring that weight of industrial production to bear. And I think ultimately that's the story. That's the story of Allied success in World War II, period, is productivity, right? It's logistics. It's about our ability to outproduce on everything all of our enemies, okay? And to be able to help supply our allies and keep them in the fight so that they can back us up and we can sustain them. It's this mutual give and take on the ally. You got to have allies. The people who have allies in a war are the ones who win, and but only allies who support each other, right? And that's the trouble. The Japanese got no support from their allies.
They get one prototype of a Tiger tank. Hey, that's nice. It's real nice. I mean, that is one of my favorite parts of Philip Payson's O'Brien book, How the War Was Won, is he basically says there was never a decisive land battle. It was all done in the air, it was all done at sea, and it was all done through supplies. Everything else, it's just a means to an end, but you have to have those three things to have successful land battles. You pretty much hammer meets nail head there.
And this feeds back to that whole Mahanian thing too, right? So okay, so if it's about the production, great. We have to get that production to where it's needed. Okay, how do you do that? Well, you do it at the time with shipping. And the key aspect, I mean, the foundational aspect of Mahan is the protection of trade or the protection of merchant shipping. That's the function of a navy. So it all starts with that. The Japanese were never interested in doing that. I think at the very end of the war, we get a few convoys that are protected by naval escorts. But the Navy thought that was beneath them. It was dishonorable. Let the Japanese Maroons go out and do what they can. But that's the critical thing. You've got to be able to get those resources to the guys who need it in the fight and back to the home islands to keep people alive. And they could not do that. Okay, so when we start sinking their Maroons, they can't replace them either. But we were protecting our merchant shipping, our merchant marine, right? The other big part of the untold story of World War II and the sacrifice that they made, which was enormous. And then, sorry, go ahead. Yeah. Sorry, I can talk on this stuff for ages. My favorite topic.
I mean, I wanted to get all the way to the end here to this one because I mean, come on, look at that.
I know, and this is sorry that the dogs might go off in a minute. But this is the real story, right? The level of production, and again, this is John Parshall's infographics. It's just astounding. I mean, what we were able to produce over the course of basically 3 years, it is just mind-boggling. And the Japanese had no chance of competing with that.
I think this was Yamamoto's fear.
Yeah. He knew it. But, one man does not a war make. You have to have the entire military construction on board with all of this, and they were not.
I find it actually really interesting, and I guess I knew this, but never really put two and two together. But there's a lot of like Revolutionary War references to carrier names, Lexington, Yorktown, Bunker Hill, which is funny because I learned not too terribly long ago that the Battle of Bunker Hill wasn't on Bunker Hill; it was on Breed's Hill.
Right.
So it's like, some cartographer out there just, screwed up. Amazing.
I know. Well, I think they started out on Bunker Hill, and that was the original plan. And then they realized that they actually had a hill closer to the enemy, closer to the point down at Charlestown, and it'd probably be a good idea if we move forward to that one because we don't want to let the enemy get high ground if we can. So yeah, it was originally in the plan, but didn't work out quite so well. So.
And just a shout out to Nathan Canistero, because we've got the Calpins right there in the middle of the graphic, and hey, The Mighty Moose still is a really good book. I just finished it up at the. This has been the summer of U.S. Navy and World War II history for Joey. I have been.
That's a good thing, Joey.
Consumer, okay, I've been.
That's a win.
I had no choice. I mean, when you're writing about a sailor in World War II and gets involved in the first race riot in the U.S. after the war, you have no choice but to try and understand all that there is to know about the Pacific War. So I have a long way to go, a long way. But before we go, and at the risk of starting another hour-long discussion, we have to talk about how Midway is presented in film, in popular culture. Because I know this is one thing that, I was your teaching assistant. We did this in a lot of classes where we, you would show clips of movies and you talk about what it depicted and if it was accurate or not, or, you would force us to read really, really terrible history books just to come in and hope that we would say, God, this was the worst, I've ever read. And then
an angry student's a good student. An outraged student is always thinking.
So so I'm trying to think of some of the shown depictions of the Omaha beach landings by showing a clip from Saving Private Ryan. You've shown airborne landings by punching in Band of Brothers. Whatever. I would contend, and I know you're going to disagree, which is why I think this is going to be fun. There is not a single good movie that has ever been made about Midway, because your choices are Charlton Heston or this awful waste of my time and money.
Oh, come on. Woody Harrelson is Nimitz. Come on. They're basically brothers. Look at him.
He's a terrible Nimitz. Oh. It's so upsetting.
Oh, come on. See, go ahead, Bo. Let it rip. Go on.
When Midway first came out, I don't know, Joey, if you saw it in theaters or he saw it on a streaming service, one of those. Saw it in theaters, and he came back, and he's just like, Midway. And I was like, was it? He's like, it's too raw America,
Overacted.
So I went and watched it. I don't have the same opinion as Joey. But I get it though, because there are some points I'm like, okay, all right, let's dial it back a little bit, but you know what? I thought it wasn't bad, and this is my opinion on things that are of popular media. As long as it gets the public interested in the historical topic, it did its job. Yeah. Because in my especially in my 201 or it's 2010 now, I don't know, those numbers are stupid. Anyway, in the first half of my American history class, I'm like, how many of you guys truly knew about Alexander Hamilton before the Broadway play? And they're like, I knew nothing about him. And I was like, who's on the $10 bill? And they're like, I don't know, Ben Franklin. I'm like, no, it's Alexander Hamilton, whatever, but now that you are at least a little bit familiar because Lin-Manuel Miranda popularized, the life of Alexander Hamilton, there have arguably been more people who've been interested in the life and times of Alexander Hamilton than, ever before. And in the same way, I think this version of Midway does that. And Woody Harrelson weirdly looks like Nimitz. I swear to God he does. So that's my opinion anyway.
Okay, so why'd you hate it, Joey?
I thought, okay, aside from like the forced inclusion of the Doolittle raid, which I think it gets a lot of things wrong. The most accurate depiction of the raid, how it took off and everything, I still think is 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, because it just feels right. It looks right. They get the idea that, the plane started out at max power and like the little things like that. Aaron Eckhart as Jimmy Doolittle, not very convincing, got to be honest. the wrong plane. Okay, fine. Okay, he's getting into the minutia here. Whatever. Okay. I didn't necessarily like that. I thought it could have just been incorporated differently, or if you're going to do it better, or make a whole other movie about it. Because it is deserving of a better feature film than the 30 seconds it gets in Pearl Harbor. That god awful shit
Yeah,
show.
now
Nope,
that's
with
a
guns.
bad
And
film.
it's
Yeah,
more
yeah.
deserving than the kind of forced 20 minutes it gets in this movie, where it just feels out of place, even though they're linked together. If you have the background reading and you have the context, you understand that the two feed in one another. But the way it's presented in the film, it's just, here's this thing that happened on an aircraft carrier. Oh, also at the same time, there's this other thing that's happening, but we're not going to tell you how it's connected. We're just going to imply that it is. So there's the missed connection there. And then I mean, it's not that it's rah American. I have no problem with that. My propaganda pieces flow freely. Uh, it's the overacting stereotypes of Americans, where everybody talks like this, and they're gonna shoot down some Japanese, and they're gonna win the war. And it's like, oh my god, just why are they all from Brooklyn? Or you get, the guy who sounds like he's just rolled off of a farm out of a hay bale. It's like no one talked like this. This is just an absurdity. And it's just, I feel like it's painful to watch at times. Mandy Moore is such an over actor. There's moments where it's like, Jesus, just, I want to be on the Arizona right now. That's how bad this entire depiction.
You guys are just too harsh, man. I'm actually shocked, Bo, that you think I share Bo's opinion on this. I didn't hate it. I thought I would hate it a lot more than I did. You're right, Joey. Okay, there's overacting, there's whatever, and the thread pickers, hate that the wrong stripes are on the aircraft and whatever, But honestly, like when you think about like the big story, the big parts of the story, they get a lot of that right. And they were right to include the Doolittle raid, but you're right, wrong not to link it to the story, saying, okay, this is actually an impetus for Midway. This is what enables Yamamoto to go ahead with the plan, right? But no, I mean, they focus on the right thing. They focus on Dick Best, right? So putting Lieutenant Richard Best at the center of this story is the right thing to do. And that's not a story that got told in the original Midway. It was all about McCluskey and what he did. I think they treat the Japanese side of things pretty well. I think they give a far better insight into the Japanese thinking on this whole campaign, better than we've seen in anything else. But the whole Doolittle raid thing. I mean, you have to look at who financed this movie, and it's Chinese financing. So the emphasis there is that, hey, Chinese over here, oi, we were your allies, guys. Let's not forget that. So, it's a purpose-built film.
I gotta be honest, that one I include it only because it's funny to watch Peter Fonda and Charlton Heston on screen, and at some point you see like just the absurdity behind some of the 1960s, 1970s, World War II films where there's always a love story. There's always a, it's
so extraneous, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's also, it seems like it never ends. It's one of those movies that's like, Jesus, this is still on?
I know. And Hal Holbrook, okay, like my beef is the Hal Holbrook in, as Joe Rochefort in the dressing gown, with the cigar, being like this really, eccentric kind of crazy guy with the code breaking. It's like, that is not who that dude was at all. Like he was a pretty conservative naval officer who happened to wear a dressing gown because it was freezing in his office in Brewback, because they have the computers there. They got to keep the computers cold. So he's working 24/7.
Bo, was it with Craig Simons or was it in the book where he was talking about, he's like, in films, Joe Rochefort has been depicted as an eccentric crazy man running around in slippers and a bathrobe. in actuality, he was a very competent naval officer who happened to be cold.
Yes.
Yeah, he was freezing. And he was pulling like 48-hour shifts constantly. Like, you know, so yeah, I mean, we get a lot of those characterizations. And unfortunately, it's depictions like that that set the tone for everything else that comes, right? Oh, that was him. So that was the depiction of Joe Rochfort for decades. Decades, until books actually came out about him saying, no, that's not the deal. And of course, that was hampered by the fact that a lot of that stuff was secret, so you couldn't talk about it anyway.
Right.
You know, and but yeah, thankfully, when records become not secret, we get to know good stuff.
I guess it's kind of one of those things too that sex sells. You know, do you have this mysterious, you know, Playboy naval officer who also dabbles in secrecy and code breaking? You know, that's cool. You know, and which kind of makes me think that the sort of the first books about Midway, because we know historians love alliteration more than anything. So Miracle at Midway, you know, we write books for two reasons, right? To advance historiography and to make money. So if you can portray, you know, Midway as a miracle, you know, you see that at a, you know, Books A Million or a Barnes and Noble, and you're like, Miracle at Midway?
Yeah, it's a hook, right? It's a hook.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, some of us write books to make money. Others of us just write books.
Here.
Yeah, I don't.
Money would be nice. I'm just saying.
Yeah, it is not a given, and in fact, it is a very rare thing. So.
Well, Bo, you know, we've done basically an entire episode of Boohickey, so I think we shall forego the Boohickey in favor of.
So, I gotta say, I have a course called Fake History and Memory Wars in World War II. I think I'm going to rename it Boohickey History.
Please do. Again, I tell Joey this all the time. I said I fear what's in here because sometimes it comes out of here. So Boohickey was one of them. And
now there's going to be a whole class of graduate students walking around going, it's Boohickey. And then we're going to hear about like the master's thesis on Boohickey and how it came to be. And I'm going to hate you forever.
Yeah, it's true.
That's not
you already do.
It's okay. I can't hate you more than you hate yourself.
Yeah, that's right. You can't say anything to me that I haven't said to myself 5 inches from a mirror. Yes, but anyway, so Sam, you know, you are on Homebrew History, so we have to ask, you are a guest of ours, what is in your cup?
Oh, well, it's pretty boring. It's water. Okay, I'm drinking the hard stuff today, but it is like 150 degrees outside.
Yes.
But I will say this. So my favorite drink of late actually came via one of my grad students. And it is, getting back to our Alexander Hamilton references, it is a rum rye drink. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I'm interested.
Okay. Called Hercules Mulligan. So I'd never heard of Hercules Mulligan till this. We did a Spies, Codes, and Conspiracy grad course, and everyone had to go and find their own spy story and report about it. And I got the story of Hercules Mulligan,
cool story.
Who was apparently a spy for George Washington, who tailored for the British officers and brought back all the secrets. He was also a mixologist, as it turns out, and created a drink that is now available, has been found and recreated, called Hercules Mulligan. It's rum and rye, spiced rum and rye, with a few other cool things thrown in. It is delicious. It is the greatest drink. And I've already gone through a bottle. Thankfully, that was a while ago. But finding it's a little tricky, but it's well worth the search. Okay? Go get yourself some Hercules Mulligan.
If teaching, you know, or history or really anything fails, Joey and I have decided to pool our money together and start a historically themed bar and food service. And so one of those drinks is the Pakenham Punch. So that's hilarious to me. But Joey,
let me guess. You're on the floor at the end of it. Is that right?
Yeah. So or you end up in a whiskey
Shot the
barrel.
pieces, yeah, and they have to pickle you. It's great.
Yeah. I mean,
Poor old Packet.
I know, poor Packet. I mean, that man got more holes in him than Swiss cheese. Bless his heart.
Yeah, he did. He sure did. Poor old guy.
He would fail to get through a metal detector. Anyway,
that's a whole other discussion.
I would like to put into contention that we need to have something for William Barksdale because he likewise was shot to pieces and shot to hell. I think to start the drink, you have to wear a wig and it gets knocked off of you when you finish the drink.
Makes sense.
Then, I mean, if you're going to get shot in the chest, have a canister round rip through your leg and rip your foot off, you may as well.
So I imagine the base of that drink would be a Barks root beer.
Ooh, Barks.
That's a he who would pun would pick a pocket, Bo.
I know. I'm full of it.
What
I'm full of is depending on the day. But today, yeah, it's but that's why my eyes are brown. But what I was drinking was a very heavy pour of Screwball peanut butter whiskey, which is just I hate that I love it so much. I really do.
You son of a bitch! You didn't even ask me what I was drinking.
I was getting there. Again, like I said, I was drinking. As you can clearly see, it's gone. Joey, what has been in your cup?
All right, so during this recording, because it's the middle of the day and I have to somehow still be responsible, I had a cup of coffee because, hey, whatever. You also know I'm a teetotaler now, apparently, in the eyes of some. But I've decided to own that. So the other night, I made myself a classic, one of my favorite drinks. I just made it as a mocktail instead. I had a Pimm's cup, and I found the perfect recipe, the perfect substitute. You have to bear with me. If you are a traditionalist, a purist, a Pimm's cup purist,
do this.
Stop listening now. Start singing whatever. Lemons and lemon juice, okay, foregone, right? Sliced cucumber, yeah, we knew that. Oranges, okay. Here we go. Fresh grated ginger, a lemon seltzer. My go-to was the San Pellegrino lemon flavor. Awesome, works perfect. You can do the sugar-free if you're looking to save on a little bit there. Hi, hello. Lemonade, I just use freshly squeezed lemons and lemon juice. Muddled strawberries, because that gives a little bit of the flavor of the Pimm's. Like it's there. Okay. And fresh mint. All that taken together, it tasted just like the real thing minus the alcohol. So
wow.
It sounds like you need a visit from the good doctor.
I don't need
McGillicuddy's.
I'm good.
Well, that would defeat the purpose of a mocktail, Bo.
It's true, but I'm not a very good mocktailologist.
Well, I'm becoming the mocktail mixologist over here. Okay,
that sounds great. I'll try that.
And you know what? It's 100 whatever degrees outside. You're outside, you're walking, you're running, whatever. Come inside, pour yourself one of those. It's actually refreshing as opposed to feeling like, wait a second. I hurt more now than I did 20 minutes ago. And the way that I can drink a Pimm's cup, it's gone in 30 seconds. So this is a wonderful find.
Yeah, and then you pay for it because it's actually quite strong.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you drink 6 of them, we have Waste Fest, and people are just buying them for you, and you're like, oh, yeah, sure, I'm not going to go to that. It's
not a good idea.
Back to the parking lot at Silverstone, I got to be honest.
To the parking lot? Are you implying that you're then going to get in a car and drive somewhere?
Well, no, I had to be driven back to the hotel we were at, and the car park is where you met your Uber, your Lyft, or
okay, gotcha. All right, just clarifying that point.
That's what it was. Zoom.
No one would do anything that irresponsible around here, right?
Exactly. Huh? We always preach drinking responsibly, but I will say that when I inevitably make my way across the pond to We Have Waste Fest, I think both Al and James are going to have to take out a second mortgage to fit my alcohol bill.
Yeah.
I think that's what they're trying to find out is
Scrumpy Jack. Scrumpy Jack will work. It's cheap, and it'll knock you on your butt.
That's right.
So you got to be careful of that stuff. It's Locals love to throw scrumpy at you. Go, oh, it's cider. It's really no big deal and
They would
delicious.
get me. They would
And
get
then
me every time.
yeah, you're no, don't do it.
Noted. Now, maybe a year and a half from now, I probably won't remember, but
You will forget.
now,
Remind you.
yeah,
You will forget. Yeah.
noted.
Co-host will come along. He'll help you out. It's okay.
Thank you.
Gotcha, homie. Doc, this has been great. Bo, fantastic. I think that these two episodes will pair together really, really well. And tell us, dear listener, dear viewer, whatever, however you're getting this, tell us what your thoughts were. And I realized just now I forgot to run the commercials, so you're going to get that, and then you're going to get the exit. So Bo, Doc, fantastic as always. Glad to have you guys here. Now, everyone, just enjoy a brief commercial break at the end of the show because lost track of time. Gotta be honest. And then we'll take us right to the outro. But until then, we'll catch you next time.
Cheers, folks.
Homebrew History is brought to you by Civil War Trails. Civil War Trails is the world's largest outdoor museum with more than 1,600 sites in 6 different states. Civil War Trails can be part of your next family vacation just by simply visiting their website, and you can find the link below in our description, or visit civilwartrails.org, where you can request a free brochure for your next road trip. Whether or not you're heading to the beach or off to Disney World, or maybe you're heading just around the block, you can make Civil War Trails part of your trip. Visit our friends at Civil War Trails. For $5 a month, you can support Homebrew History. Head over to our Buy Me a Coffee page where you can subscribe and become a member of the Homebrew crew. There, for just $5, you get access to ad-free episodes, exclusive episodes with our guests. You get a little bit more bang for your buck when it comes to the whole series episodes. We've got a series coming out, you get the whole thing all in one run, as opposed to having to wait around like everyone else. Join us over on the Buy Me a Coffee page and help support Homebrew History. Remember, for just $5 a month, you make sure Homebrew History has enough. Homebrew History is proud to partner with our friend the bearded historian, Jeff Williams. Head on over to his shop where you can check out some of his great designs. He's got all kinds of great designs just waiting for you, featuring artifacts and objects from all kinds of historical periods, and designs featuring some of your favorite scenes and actors from films and series like A Bridge Too Far, Band of Brothers, Gettysburg, Kelly's Heroes, and much, much more. If you're not already following us over on Facebook, Instagram, and now Blue Sky, check us out. And make sure that you're subscribed and listening to us on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, and on YouTube. And if you're watching that YouTube channel, be sure to like and subscribe. We'll be back after just a few